I want to talk for a minute about pneumothorax, and pneumothorax is some injection or forming of air in the chest cavity, in the pleura around the lungs, the space between the lungs and the chest wall. When air is introduced for various reasons into this area, it puts a lot of pressure or tension upon the lungs, not allowing them to expand to their full distance, and the person feels short of breath, lowers their blood pressure, has a hard time breathing, and it can be very painful. And there are various classifications or reasons for pneumothorax, where this air gets in and causes sometimes even partial or total collapse of a lung. And I have the classifications on the board behind me here. A primary pneumothorax happens primarily in tall, thin people, young, tall, thin males most commonly. And a bleb, or an air blister of various sizes on the outside of the lung, has formed, and when it ruptures, it introduces this air and of course causes pressure in that cavity, perhaps partially collapsing the lung. So we'll put the word bleb up here, and realizing that happens in tall, thin, younger people, usually males. So that's primary pneumothorax. A secondary pneumothorax has to do with a chronic disease like COPD or cystic fibrosis, these sorts of things. And because of the disease, it causes the problem of the air to form around the outside of the lungs in the chest cavity, putting more and more pressure on the lungs and causing problems in that regard. Traumatic pneumothorax occurs when either through blunt force trauma, a knife wound, some other form of exterior air being forced into the chest cavity. Sometimes it's chest tubes, sometimes it's even from surgery, but when the air comes in from the outside, gets into that cavity, once again putting pressure on the lungs, keeping them from inflating fully, and that painful situation of not being able to get your breath, of not getting the oxygen you need, and usually becoming, because of a trauma, introduces it. So we'll talk maybe about blunt force trauma, knife wound, surgery, chest tube. And then finally, tension pneumothorax. Tension pneumothorax comes around when there's a one-way valve, if you will, air coming in but not being allowed to go out, coming in to the pleural space, that area between the lungs and the chest wall. And because it can't escape, it continues to build and build and build, and is a medical emergency, needs to be dealt with right away because it can be fatal. So we have one-way valve of some sort formed. Air comes in. But cannot come out, continuing to build the tension in the chest cavity around the lungs, creating a life-threatening situation. So these are the various stages or classifications or forms of a pneumothorax, where they come from. And I hope that information has helped you. Primary happens in tall, thin, younger males generally. Secondary is because of a chronic disease. Traumatic is a wound of some sort, and then the tension coming from that air coming in from the outside, sometimes also from chest tubes, but it builds and builds and builds and must be released medically before it becomes life-threatening.